Blind people got a humming Jones, if you notice, which is understandable completely once you've been around one and notice what no eyes will force you into to see people. And you get past the first time, which seems to come out of nowhere. And it's like you in church again with fat chest ladies and old gents grunting a hum low in the throat to whatever the preacher be saying. Shaky B bottom lip all swelled up with sweet peach. And me explaining how come the sweet potato bread was $1.25 this time instead of dollar regular. And he say, uh-huh, he understand. Then he break into this tizzing kind of hum, which is quiet, but fearsome like just the same, if you ain't ready for it, which I wasn't. That is the start of Tony Kaye's Bambara first story in the collection Gorilla My Love. That first story is My Man Brovan. And I got a comment about that title first. There's a lot of room for flex in that title, for stretch. If you are familiar with somebody, you can use that term like my man, somebody that you can depend on, somebody that you're familiar with. But if it's a little bit more intimate, let's say, it could be my man Brovan. Same thing, same words, different meaning, different inflection and stuff. And so I like her choice of title for that because it has that capacity, it has that room to follow the shifts that are in the story. Now, my man Brovan, this story presents an opportunity to explain how Bambara creates the credible voice of her protagonist, Hazel, this is the first person account, a first person point of view, which allows Hazel to do the work here for her. For a long while, when people mention voice in literature, it was commonly mistaken as the author's style, the authorial voice, so to speak, rather than the narrative voice, which is common. It was a common mistake. But that voice that we're hearing and we're talking about really is the voice that's coming off the page into our ear, and we're hearing a person talk. It's character speech. Character speech. Narrative voice is the character speech that we read and we hear. Bambara lets Hazel speak to us. And okay, Bambara primarily uses she uses two things in here in creating the credible speech of her protagonist: diction and syntax. Those are her two mainstays. But there are other elements at play as well, and we should also look at those. In her short story, My Man Brovan, she uses details to first develop the character Hazel as a middle-aged African-American woman. The presence of her adult children, the antagonist here, help establish that, as well as details of her long-time familiarity with Brovan, that long-time friendship that she's had with him. Just a friendship, a knowledge of somebody in the neighborhood, and that's how the story starts. And Brovan is also approaching elder status. He is a middle-aged person as well. The details provided on the political atmosphere of black nationalism sets the story in the 60s, the mid to late 60s, because that is when the Black Arts Movement was created, which was initially created in the cities. These cities were historic places of African American migrations following the wars, World War I, World War II, primarily, but all during that period they migrated for the same reason everybody migrates: better jobs, better education for their kids, more opportunity, and being from the South to escape the racial oppression of the Deep South. So that is the person who Hazel is. Now, as I say, Bambara uses primarily syntax and diction, but there are other things as well that she keys into, and one is dialect. Dialect. Dialect is a tenet of the Black Arts Movement, which is the artistic wing of the Black Power movement, and it still exists today. So one of their things was that the language that we use in writing will be from our own communities. The rhythm that we use will be reflective of the music in our communities. The cultural icons that we put in our work will be those that are actually found in our communities. Yeah, that's the Black Arts Movement. It was subordinate to the Black Power movement. So the political side is very important here. Okay, and so we can see this is set in the 60s, following those migration, and this migration point is for Bambara. It's Brooklyn. It's the neighborhood that she grew up in. Much different than the Brooklyn we see today. Much different. So Hazel apparently migrated from the South. She apparently migrated from the South, and she has come to New York, but her children are born New Yorkers. So Bambara's task was creating a spoken language, a dialect that fits her characters. Now, dialect is a language used by people of a specific group, class, culture, and distinguishes them from others. It's an essential tool in developing characters by expressing their geographic and social background. African American writers of the Black Arts Movement, which came to being in the mid to late 60s, started in the mid 60s, 65, 66, championed and led by Larry Neal and Amiri Baraka. It is the artistic wing of the Black Power movement. And as I said, their tenets were to write in the language of their communities and to use everything that's found in their communities. And that is probably more readily seen in the work of poets, but it's also found in the works of the prosers as well. And Bambara is from that period, and she is a proponent of part of the Black Arts movement, and she is following these things. And it's important to her to establish dialect. Toni Cade Bambara chose to write in the language of her culture, found in her Brooklyn community, but by using that language, it's the language of a marginalized people. She asserts the cultural identity of African Americans. The Black Arts Movement, believe it or not, is still in effect today. There are a lot of African American writers that still hold true to those tenets. Now, let's look at those two things she does. The two main things now. So we got dialect, right? She's using that. Syntax. What is syntax? The relation of words in a sentence to convey a complete thought. In other words, a set of rules on how parts of speech are put together in a sentence. Remember when people used to diagram sentences in school? Yeah, I know. It doesn't happen anymore. But it used to, yeah. And you know what the main riding horse for that was? Or what it really is? Grammar. Grammar. Standard order of syntax in English is subject, verb, object. Following in that order. Subject, verb, object. And it can be inverted, and that would reflect cultural variations. And that creates artistic effects as well, such as defining rhythm in the spoken language to establish tone. Yeah. Diction, now, is the style of speaking determined by the choice of words by a speaker. That choice has to be accurate and right for the speaker. It should be appropriate to the context in which it is used. And that choice has to have clarity and be easily understood. Now, what did those first four sentences give us about Hazel? You know, just in her language, a choice of words. She's a very informal speaking person here. She's talking to us as if she's talking to a friend, right? She's having a conversation. So the narration here from this protagonist, this first person point of view, is a conversational tone. It's a conversational tone. Even though it shifts in mood every now and then, or attitude, which is what tone is, we still see Hazel as this person who wants to just to live her life. And she uses this, Bambara uses this to build a base for her. Now, diction. Diction is a style of speaking determined by the choice of words by a speaker. That choice has to be accurate, like I say, and right for the speaker. It should be appropriate to the context in which it is used, and it has to have clarity. It has to be easily understood. The four types of diction are, there is a formal diction, words that are specific to a profession or a presentation, words used for formal situations. Okay, but that means there's a certain language that comes from scientists. There's a certain language that comes from engineers. There's a certain language that comes with any specific job or profession like that, which is used when it's appropriate. That's your formal diction. Your informal diction, a conversational choice of words used mostly when talking with people we are very familiar with, like talking to friends. Like she's talking to us with her narration as if we're friends. This is Hazel explaining what went down in this incident of the political party, the fundraiser that she was attending. And the conflict develops with her actions in dancing with Bovan and her children's attitudes about her behavior. Which comes to the conflict point here is ageism. So let's look at the third kind of diction here. That would be words, colloquial diction, words commonly used in everyday speech, which may vary in different regions or within different cultures, or within different communities, and within different generations. So when we see Hazel, that's where we see her operating mostly in the informal diction and the colloquial. The fourth type of diction, slang. Slang. The use of words or phrases, newly created by a particular set of people or for particular situations, like, better get woke. You know what I mean? Yeah, get woke. Well, which might be polite or impolite or vulgar or profane even. Slang, Slang is what's considered once the language of rough people. Not quite so much now that everybody uses it to a certain degree. Now let's check how Bambara uses her main two workhorses in creating the voice of Hazel and those voices of her children, syntax and diction. Got to combine them together to make all this happen. They are a matched pair. They're a team of horses here. Hazel. Her voice, her speaking voice, her character speech, that narrative voice, is a base of informal and colloquial speech. She uses phrases like just talking on the drum when her children see her dancing and confront her, or and you want me to belly rub with the Reverend? That it? These are used to refer to a sensuous dancing, sex progression that her children are implying or accusing her of. And look how she showed what she does with her daughter. My daughter cutting her eyes. Yeah, you know what that means, right? You seen people cut their eyes? Yeah. Side, now they call it side eye, giving people side eye. That's what cutting the eyes is. That's a physical movement that shows her daughter's scorn. But those are colloquial terms and phrases that Bambara uses to make this all happen, to create that voices and to keep and that separation of voices. The children now, that's Hazel, right? Informal, colloquial. She doesn't have a complex, a complexity of syntax. Um, she straightforward, simple. Her choices of words are simple. The children now, her grown children. All they say now, her grown ass children. You know, um, this is one reason that we know that Hazel is in middle age, because um, they are at a political fundraiser. They they are uh, they are using different types of words, um, and you know they're old enough to vote. They're old enough to vote. This is why they're there. They're also very in tune to a different New York than the one in which Hazel apparently migrated into from the South. So that's the children. Um, the voices of the children also have a working base of informal diction and colloquial speech. But they also slip into a more elevated diction when they're admonishing their mothers, such as her daughter's response when Hazel suggests that their attitudes uh, about her way of dancing might be that they are projecting a generation gap. And the daughter's response: generation gap? That's a white concept for a white phenomenon. There is no generation gap among black people. The choice of words shifts, it elevates now, and she's moving towards a more formal diction. She's admonishing her mother for her behavior, and this creates some separation here because it shows them to be different than their mother in that way. Generation gap? There's none here. The syntax and word choices of Hazel's children shows that education is a factor that distinguishes them from their mother. They have her southern roots, but they have not lived in the South as she has. They are native New Yorkers, and they are better educated and also more political than she is. They think they got it going on. Diction is the choice of words used in a particular situation. So let's say that roughly 15% of African Americans speak only standard English, a very formal language, a very straightforward English syntax. Subject, verb, object, and there's another 15% of African Americans that speak only what has been commonly called Ebonics. Neighborhood from the streets, around the streets, that type of language. The mixed version of the Africanisms in the language, the inverted syntax, the shifting of words, the choices of words. Yeah. Choices of words and the shifting of the syntax. Now, what about the other remaining 70% of African Americans? That would mean that they speak in a language that code switches all up and down that language board. Diction is a choice of words. It can define culture, it can define class, it can define education, it can define region, it can show us everything about a person in their choices of words. Now, but keep in mind, like I said, diction varies at different times with all of us. As we code switch, as we move to make certain things clear and for specific situations. But it's going to show us basically that geographical region or our social background. It's going to show our culture. It's going to show our class. And remember, I said that one of Bambara's aesthetic pushes is to create dialect, the dialect of this marginalized community, of the people within it, and that brings a cultural identity to African Americans. It locks us in to being who we are and from where we are, no matter where we live now. We have those roots. And that is her point in that. Syntax determines how the chosen words are used in a sentence, right? Complex diction requires sentences of complex syntactical structures, and vice versa. You get simpler as you move down the line on the types of diction. The language gets simpler. And the combination of syntax and diction helps establish tone, mood, and atmosphere in a story or a poem. And if you don't believe me about that, just listen to Hazel as Baumbauer lets her tell us.